It was a morning like any other. The sun had just begun to rise, casting a warm glow over the city of Philadelphia. Jerry Lane, a former United Nations investigator, was busy preparing breakfast for his family. His wife, Karen, and their two daughters, Rachel and Constance, were seated at the dining table, enjoying the peaceful start to their day. Little did they know, this tranquility was about to be shattered. As they sat eating, the news on the television caught Jerry's attention. Reports were coming in of unusual attacks occurring in various parts of the world. The anchor spoke of people exhibiting rabid behavior, attacking others without provocation. Initially, it seemed like isolated incidents, but the frequency and intensity of the reports suggested something far more sinister. Jerry's phone buzzed, interrupting his thoughts. It was an urgent call from his old friend and former colleague, Thierry Umatoni, who still worked at the UN. "Jerry, we need your help. There's something big going on. Get your family and get out of the city, now." Before Jerry could respond, the sound of sirens filled the air, and a sense of dread washed over him. He looked out the window to see chaos unfolding on the streets below. People were running in every direction, some covered in blood, others screaming in terror. It was clear the situation was escalating rapidly. "Everyone, we need to leave now," Jerry said, his voice firm but calm. He quickly gathered some essentials and ushered his family into their car. As they drove through the city, the scenes they witnessed were horrifying. Bodies lay scattered on the ground, some motionless, others twitching in grotesque spasms. It was as if the city had descended into madness overnight. They drove through the chaos, heading for the relative safety of the countryside. As they sped along the highway, Jerry's mind raced. He needed to understand what was happening, but more importantly, he needed to keep his family safe. The realization that this was no ordinary outbreak dawned on him. It was something far more deadly, and it was spreading rapidly. They reached a rural area and decided to take shelter in an abandoned farmhouse. It was eerily quiet, a stark contrast to the chaos they had left behind. Jerry secured the perimeter, making sure the doors and windows were barricaded. Inside, the family huddled together, the fear in their eyes palpable. That night, as they tried to rest, the silence was broken by distant screams and the occasional gunshot. Jerry sat by the window, keeping watch. His mind wandered to the reports he had seen earlier that day. These weren't just random acts of violence. This was an outbreak, a pandemic of unprecedented scale. The next morning, Jerry contacted Thierry again. "Thierry, what do you know about this outbreak?" Thierry's voice was grave. "It's worse than we feared. This isn't a virus we're dealing with. It's a pathogen unlike any we've ever seen. It spreads through bites, and those infected turn into mindless, violent creatures. We're calling them zombies." Jerry felt a chill run down his spine. Zombies. The word conjured up images of horror movies, but this was real. "What's the plan? How do we stop it?" "The UN is coordinating with governments around the world, but we're struggling to contain it. We need to find the origin of the outbreak, a patient zero. Without that, we have no hope of developing a vaccine or a cure." Jerry knew what he had to do. Despite the danger, he couldn't sit idly by while the world burned. "I'm in, Thierry. Tell me where to start." Thierry gave him the coordinates of a military base where the UN was setting up a command center. It was a risky journey, but Jerry was determined. He explained the situation to Karen, who, despite her fear, supported his decision. They hugged tightly, and Jerry promised he would come back for them. As Jerry set out on his mission, the reality of the situation weighed heavily on him. The world was on the brink of collapse, and humanity's survival hinged on finding a solution to this horrific outbreak. He drove through deserted towns and highways, the remnants of civilization crumbling around him. Reaching the military base, Jerry was greeted by Thierry and a team of scientists and military personnel. The atmosphere was tense, everyone acutely aware of the stakes. They briefed Jerry on their findings so far and the potential locations to investigate for leads on the origin of the outbreak. Jerry's first mission was to travel to South Korea, where one of the earliest reports of the outbreak had surfaced. He joined a small team of soldiers and boarded a plane, the weight of his task pressing down on him. As they flew through the night, Jerry thought of his family, drawing strength from the hope that his efforts might bring them a safer future. Upon landing in South Korea, they were met with resistance. The base they arrived at was under siege from zombies, and the situation was dire. Jerry and the team fought their way through, the sound of gunfire and the stench of decay filling the air. Inside, they found Dr. Fassbach, a scientist who had been studying the outbreak. Dr. Fassbach shared crucial information. The virus seemed to have an almost supernatural ability to spread and adapt. He believed the key to stopping it lay in understanding it. Jerry and his team arrived in Jerusalem to find the city in a state of heightened security. Massive walls had been erected to keep the zombies out, and the military presence was strong. The city's success in defending itself was a glimmer of hope in an otherwise bleak situation. Jerry met with Jürgen Warmbrunn, an Israeli intelligence officer who had been instrumental in fortifying the city. Warmbrunn explained that they had intercepted Indian military communications that hinted at the outbreak months before it became a global crisis. They had acted on this intelligence, building the walls in time to protect their citizens. As they toured the city, Jerry saw firsthand the measures taken to maintain order. Despite the security, the tension was palpable. The constant threat of zombie breaches kept everyone on edge. Warmbrunn shared his insights, suggesting that the answer to the outbreak might lie in a facility in India, where the initial reports had originated. Before they could act on this lead, disaster struck. A massive wave of zombies breached the wall, overrunning the city. The scene was pure chaos as the undead swarmed through the streets, attacking anyone in their path. Jerry and Warmbrunn fought their way through the horde, trying to reach safety. The screams of the infected and the uninfected alike filled the air, creating a nightmarish symphony of terror. In the midst of the chaos, Jerry witnessed something peculiar. As the zombies rampaged, they seemed to ignore certain people, passing by them without attacking. This observation sparked a theory. Perhaps the virus didn't attack those who were already sick or otherwise undesirable hosts. It was a slim lead, but it was all they had. In the sterile, dimly lit confines of the WHO laboratory, Jerry Lane's heart pounded fiercely against his chest as he prepared for the most perilous phase of his journey. The lab, filled with vials of deadly pathogens and ominous medical instruments, cast long shadows over the steel tables, creating an eerie tableau. As the scientists readied the syringe, the air was thick with apprehension, each moment stretching into an eternity. Jerry's thoughts drifted to his family. The memory of their faces gave him the courage to nod at the lead researcher, Dr. Erin Sosa. With a steady hand, she injected him with a cocktail of pathogens, a dangerous gambit that could either be his salvation or his doom. The room fell silent, the only sound Jerry's labored breathing and the distant moans of zombies contained in a nearby secure testing area. His body shivered uncontrollably as the pathogens began to invade his system, his temperature spiking while cold sweat drenched his clothes. The scientist monitored his vitals anxiously, ready to intervene if the situation deteriorated further. Hours passed as Jerry lay in a feverish delirium. His dreams were haunted by visions of the infected, their gnarled hands reaching for him, their cries a grotesque symphony. He awoke with a start, his body weak but strangely unharmed by the infection. It seemed the experiment had worked. He was alive, and preliminary observations suggested the zombies might indeed ignore him. Armed with this new, albeit risky advantage, Jerry prepared to venture back into the world. Dr. Sosa equipped him with a body camera and a live feed so the team could monitor his interactions with the infected. If his theory was correct, he could walk among the zombies unnoticed, gathering critical data to aid in developing a vaccine. As night fell, Jerry, clad in a protective suit and armed only with a flashlight, stepped into the quarantine zone. The area around the facility overrun with zombies. The air was thick with the stench of decay, and the low growl of the undead filled the darkness. His flashlight cut through the blackness, revealing the hollow, lifeless eyes of the infected as they wandered aimlessly. Jerry's heart raced as he walked closer to a group of zombies. The creatures turned towards him, their movements jerky and unnatural. He stood still, his breath caught in his throat. One by one, the zombies sniffed the air, and then, inexplicably, They moved past him. Jerry remained unscathed, a ghost amidst the horror. Emboldened, Jerry continued deeper into the horde, his camera capturing every moment. The live feedback at the lab showed the researchers glued to their screens, hardly believing what they were seeing. This breakthrough was monumental, but there was no time to celebrate. Jerry pressed on, determined to find the source of the outbreak. The deeper he ventured into the city, the more harrowing the environment became. Buildings were mere shells of their former selves, the streets littered with the wreckage of civilization. Screams echoed in the distance, a chilling reminder that not all were as fortunate as him to evade the deadly grasp of the infected. Suddenly, a shriek pierced the night. Jerry turned to see a group of survivors cornered by a swarm of zombies. Without thinking, he rushed to their aid, using flares to distract the creatures. The survivors, a ragtag group of civilians, were terrified but unharmed. Among them was a young woman, her eyes wide with terror, clutching a tattered diary to her chest. She whispered to Jerry that her father, a scientist at a nearby research center, had predicted the outbreak and documented his findings in the diary. Realizing the potential importance of the diary, Jerry escorted the survivors back to the WHO facility. As they made their way through the desolate streets, avoiding zombie clusters, the weight of the situation bore down on him. Every second was a battle against time and death. Back at the lab, Dr. Sosa pored over the diary. It contained critical information about the pathogen's origin. A mutated strain developed accidentally in a lab, the result of a failed experiment that sought to enhance human immunity against all known diseases. This revelation was a double-edged sword. While it provided a clear target for research, it also highlighted the colossal mistake that had led humanity to the brink of extinction. As the team absorbed the gravity of their discovery, an alarm sounded. The facility was being overrun. Zombies, drawn by the noise and lights, began breaking through the defenses. Jerry and the survivors prepared for a last stand, their hearts racing as the undead tide surged towards them. In the midst of the chaos, Jerry realized that their only hope was to use his invisibility to the zombies to lead them away, creating a diversion that would allow the others to escape. Kissing the photograph of his family one last time, he stepped into the night, drawing. Jerry stepped out into the night, his heart pounding like a war drum. The darkness enveloped him, broken only by the sporadic flickers of distant fires and the eerie, relentless groans of the undead. He moved cautiously, the ground slick with blood and entrails, the air thick with decay. Every step felt like a march into the abyss. The zombies, drawn by the noise of the breached facility, surged towards the barricades. Jerry, his flashlight off, relied on the pale moonlight to navigate the chaos. He moved among the undead, their putrid stench making him gag, but they ignored him, just as before. It was both a miracle and a curse, being invisible to these monsters. He reached an alleyway and lit a flare, waving it high to catch the zombies' attention. The sudden burst of light and smoke drew their lifeless eyes. They turned, groaning, and shuffled towards him. Jerry backed away slowly, leading the horde down the narrow street, away from the facility and the survivors. The flare's red glow cast long, sinister shadows, transforming the alley into a corridor of horrors. The undead followed, an unending tide of death. Jerry's breath came in shallow gasps as he led them through the maze of ruined buildings, the eerie quiet broken only by the shuffling footsteps and guttural moans of the zombies. His mind raced with memories of his family, their faces his only beacon of hope in this living nightmare. Suddenly, the ground gave way beneath him. Jerry fell into a basement, the impact jarring his bones. The flare was extinguished, plunging him into pitch blackness. The groans grew louder as zombies began to pour into the basement after him. Panic surged through Jerry. He scrambled to his feet, feeling his way through the darkness, desperate to find an escape. He found a door and forced it open, stumbling into an underground tunnel. The smell was unbearable, the air thick with rot and mildew. He moved quickly, the sound of the zombies following close behind. The tunnel twisted and turned, each corner revealing new horrors. Half-eaten corpses, skeletal remains, and pools of stagnant water. As he rounded a bend, Jerry's flashlight flickered back to life, illuminating the path ahead. He saw a ladder leading up to a manhole. With the last of his strength, he climbed, his fingers slipping on the cold, wet rungs. The zombies were almost upon him, their growls echoing off the tunnel walls. He pushed the manhole cover aside and emerged into a deserted street. The night was still, the city a graveyard of silence. Jerry collapsed, gasping for air. He had done it. He had led the horde away, buying the survivors precious time. But as he lay there, exhaustion taking over, he knew this was far from over. The world was a nightmare from which there was no waking, and the fight for survival had only just begun. Jerry rose slowly, every muscle aching, and began his solitary walk back to the facility, the weight of humanity's fate pressing down on him with each step. The journey was far from over, and the abyss was deeper than he had ever imagined. Jerry staggered back towards the facility, the city around him a desolate wasteland. Shadows danced in the flickering light of burning buildings, and the distant screams of the living and the dead intertwined into a symphony of despair. Each step was a struggle, his body battered and his mind teetering on the edge of sanity. As he approached the facility, he saw it was overrun. Zombies clawed at the barricades, their relentless assault breaking down the last defenses. The survivors inside fought desperately, but it was a losing battle. Jerry knew he had to act fast, or all would be lost. He slipped through a side entrance, the familiar corridors now a labyrinth of horror. Blood smeared the walls, and the air was thick with the stench of death. He moved silently, his every sense heightened. The groans of the undead were close, too close. In the dim light, Jerry saw Dr. Sosa and a few remaining survivors huddled in the laboratory, surrounded by makeshift barricades. Their eyes widened in relief as they saw him, but there was no time for reunion. The zombies were breaking through. Jerry quickly relayed his plan. They needed to secure the data and get to the roof where a helicopter could extract them. Dr. Sosa grabbed the hard drives containing the crucial research, and they prepared for the final push. The moans of the zombies grew louder, echoing through the halls, a harbinger of the impending doom. They moved swiftly but carefully, the tension palpable. Each corner turned could reveal a horde of the undead. As they reached the stairwell, the zombies burst through the barricades. Jerry and the others fought fiercely, using whatever they could to fend off the relentless attackers. The hallway became a scene of carnage, the undead falling but always more taking their place. They reached the roof access, but the door was jammed. Jerry and a soldier named Miguel pushed against it with all their might, the groans of zombies growing closer. With a final heave, the door gave way, and they stumbled onto the roof, the night air a brief respite from the suffocating horror inside. The helicopter was there, blades whirring. The helicopter soared through the night, the distant glow of fires marking the remnants of civilization. Jerry Lane looked out over the ravaged landscape, his heart heavy with the weight of the mission ahead. Beside him, Dr. Sosa clutched the hard drives, their lifeline to a possible cure. The survivors sat in silence, each lost in their thoughts. The memories of the horrors they had witnessed etched deeply in their minds. They landed at a remote military outpost, one of the last bastions of organized resistance against the zombie plague. Soldiers and scientists worked tirelessly, their faces drawn and haggard from weeks of relentless combat and research. Jerry and Dr. Sosa were quickly ushered into the command center, where General Hargrove, the outpost's commander, awaited them. "Welcome, Mr. Lane, Dr. Sosa," Hargrove said, his voice gruff but tinged with a hint of hope. "We've heard of your exploits. What you've brought us might be our only chance." Dr. Sosa wasted no time. She handed over the hard drives and began coordinating with the outpost's lead researchers. The facility buzzed with activity as the data was analyzed and experiments commenced. Jerry, however, knew that they were racing against time. The undead were relentless, and their numbers seemed to grow by the hour. Days passed in a blur of tense anticipation. The researchers worked around the clock, the sounds of their efforts mingling with the ever-present groans of zombies just beyond the outpost's fortified walls. Jerry found it hard to rest. his mind constantly replaying the horrors he had witnessed. He spent most of his time on the perimeter, assisting the soldiers in keeping the undead at bay. One night, a breakthrough. Dr. Sosa and her team had isolated a possible cure, a synthesized version of the virus that, when introduced into the bloodstream of an infected individual, seemed to halt the progression of the disease. They needed a live test subject to confirm its efficacy, and Jerry volunteered without hesitation. Strapped to a gurney, Jerry felt the cold prick of the needle as Dr. Sosa administered the antidote. His body convulsed, the pain unlike anything he had ever experienced. His veins burned and his vision blurred as the antidote coursed through his system. He could feel the eyes of everyone in the room on him, their hopes and fears intertwined. Minutes stretched into hours, but finally Jerry's vital signs stabilized. The antidote had worked, at least preliminarily. But to be sure, they needed to test it on someone who was already in the early stages of infection. General Hargrove suggested a captured zombie kept for research purposes. With grim determination, they prepared for the final, critical test. The team moved to the containment area, where a restrained zombie thrashed against its bonds. Jerry watched as Dr. Sosa injected the creature with the antidote. The reaction was immediate and violent. The zombie screeched, its body convulsing as the antidote fought the infection. Slowly the thrashing subsided, and the creature fell still. Its eyes, once clouded with rage, seemed to clear, though it remained feral and dangerous. "It's working," Dr. Sosa whispered, tears of relief streaming down her face. "We have a chance." The outpost erupted in cautious celebration. Plans were quickly put into motion to produce the antidote on a large scale and distribute it worldwide. Jerry felt a weight lift from his shoulders, a glimmer of hope piercing the darkness that had shrouded the world for so long. But the battle was far from over. The zombies continued their relentless assault on the outpost, and they needed to buy time. Jerry managed to escape the city with a small group of survivors, including Segan, an Israeli soldier who had lost her hand during the attack. They made their way to an airfield, hoping to find a plane to take them to their next destination. The urgency of their mission was overshadowed by the ever-present threat of the zombies, who seemed to be everywhere. They boarded a cargo plane, and as they took off, Jerry felt a momentary sense of relief. But their troubles were far from over. Mid-flight, a zombie that had stowed away on the plane emerged, attacking the passengers. Panic ensued as the infection spread rapidly in the confined space. Jerry knew they had to act fast to prevent the plane from becoming a flying death trap. In a desperate move, Jerry detonated a grenade, blowing a hole in the side of the plane. The explosive decompression sucked the zombies out, but the plane was severely damaged. It crash-landed in a remote area, and Jerry was knocked unconscious in the impact. He awoke in a WO research facility, his body battered but alive. The scientists there had found him and brought him in. They were conducting their own research on the virus and were intrigued by Jerry's theory about the zombies ignoring certain individuals. Jerry's hypothesis was put to the test. He volunteered to inject himself with a deadly pathogen to see if it would make him invisible to the zombies. The tension in the lab was thick as they waited to see the results. If he was wrong, it would mean certain death. The night was eerily quiet as they fortified their positions. The air was thick with anticipation and the acrid smell of gunpowder. Jerry stood at the forefront, weapon in hand, his resolve unwavering. The first wave of zombies appeared on the horizon, their silhouettes a terrifying reminder of the nightmare they were fighting to end. The battle was fierce and brutal. The undead swarmed in waves, crashing against the outpost's defenses. Gunfire and explosions lit up the night, the screams of the living and the dead merging into a cacophony of horror. Jerry fought with everything he had, his mind focused on the faces of his family and the hope of a future free from this plague. Hours felt like days as they held the line. Slowly but surely, the tide began to turn. The antidote was being distributed and reports started to come in from other outposts and survivors. People were being saved, the infected were being cured. The realization fueled their determination, and with a final desperate push, they repelled the last wave of the undead. As dawn broke, the battlefield fell silent. The survivors stood amidst the carnage, exhausted but triumphant. Jerry looked around at the faces of those who had fought beside him, a sense of camaraderie and profound relief washing over him. They had done it. They had given humanity a fighting chance. In the days and weeks that followed, the cure was distributed worldwide. The tide of the zombie apocalypse began to recede, and slowly, the world started to rebuild. Jerry reunited with his family, the joy of their embrace a stark contrast to the horrors they had endured. The road ahead was long and fraught with challenges, but for the first time in a long time, there was hope. The nightmare of the zombie apocalypse had left indelible scars on the world, but it had also revealed the strength and resilience of the human spirit. Jerry Lane had faced the abyss and emerged victorious, a beacon of hope in a world reborn from the ashes of horror.